Whatever way you'll put it, religion will always mean slavery. Even if it is, to a god, to a government, or to whatever, religion will always be slavery to yourself. Okay. Now, I've been saying indirectly the idea that the self is nothing else than an accumulation, something that you have ended up accepting from multiple sources, right? Opinions, points of views, uh, points of view, let's say, emotions, uh, attachments of physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual nature, whatever. Everything that you have accumulated in life, all the knowledge inclusive, that is taken from somewhere else, right? When you came into this world, you were not aware of any God or Allah or any other deity that you are actually theoretically supporting. Because ultimately, how can you support something you have not realized that exists? Now, I'm not saying God does not exist, but ultimately, we are, well, we, not me, but many people are, bowing down before a deity they don't even know, right? The point is, what if this deity is not necessarily human shaped, right? A deity that is far beyond this universe can't be just human, right? Most likely they don't have any physical shape at all. What if there are multiple beings, right? And they form a collective or they form a single way, because ultimately everything that goes beyond the matter, right? Everything that goes beyond physicality is definitely a union, because only in physicality there can exist separation. Because physicality, by its definition, is separation, right? You are separated from others because you have your own physical entity, right? But our beings, that which is beyond the physical is interconnected with others. Because any damage that you do, everything that you manifest in your life, right? All your deeds, good and bad, they will influence a certain karmic structure, right? The karmic structure of our own race. And that is why the newer generations will always be influenced by what the previous generations do. And especially when people live in ignorance, right? When people live in ignorance, they will definitely do a lot of things, usually bad things. And those things will influence a lot of people, and they will be carried on by the next generations, again, ignorantly. And they will manifest in people's lives as, those repetitive bad cycles, right? Or impulses that people cannot run away from. Like, for example, smoking or gambling or things like that, which will require a certain person in the generational line to actually break it, right? And if people aren't strong enough in the face of ignorance, they will carry it on and they will simply pass it on to the next generation. So this is one way through which the previous generation of people, even if there's like grandparents whom you have never seen in your life, you haven't met in your life, they are still influencing you through these karmic structures, right? Now, religion is also another way of karma, right? It is a thing that, in the case of Christianity, it has created a lot of pain. It has created 1,000 years of suppression, right? And keeping people in horrible conditions by using very deceitful words, right? Powerful lies that, if one lives in utter poverty, they will have earned themselves a place, of full riches in heavens, right? And this has been on for thousands of years, right? And let's not forget that Christianity has created all these hundreds of years of suppression, right? And pain and execution of anyone who thinks otherwise than it was imposed, right? So it was nothing else than a dictatorial regime. Now, thinking that, everything regarding the feminine energy has been highly suppressed, and women were seen as witches or very bad elements of society because they could simply be tempting to some people, but not because the woman was beautiful or in one way or another, but because people were simply sexually depraved, because that's what you end up with when you create so much suppression. And when you use all these pillars of, self-doubt, right? You use shame against people. You use all sorts of, manipulation against people. Or basically manipulation is nothing else than black magic, because manipulation and black magic are the same exact thing. Manipulation means using any energy of other people against themselves, right? Through any action, you make one person's or a group of people's energy turned against themselves. Or technically, you are breeding cancer within people. Because cancer, even the physical one, right, at the physical level, it means nothing else than a part of you turning against you. And if you think this through, you will see that literally nowadays everyone lives more or less in cancer. Why? Because people are always in doubt. They don't agree to anything and they always argue and doubt everything. Because ultimately, the only way, a very easy way actually to be ruled in life, is through the pillars of control, right? Which is the lower emotions. The most important one, the fear, right? And Christianity has always used its fear of God. And, well, I do understand that hundreds of years ago, people would simply believe in a God, that, well, it's a God of love, and for whatever strange reasons you have to fear a God of love. Well, that was the awareness of people hundreds of years ago. But nowadays, guess what? You have people who still live in the same way because they are still under the influence of, the karmic structures that their predecessors have created. And this requires for powerful, newer generations to start purging through that. Well, we're naturally purging through that anyways, because people are kind of, lowering slowly and surely their, this fanatical trust in a deity. Now, I'm not saying it's bad to trust in God or something like that, but when such a structure, such a belief, and the belief means nothing else than accepting something without a necessity for proof, the point is using a belief to rule, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of people, in this case billions of people, well, that is nothing else than authoritarian, right? Some people simply don't feel justified enough and they are using psychopathic and, narcissistic traits. Well, actually, those are ruling them because usually these folks aren't represented by, a great level of self-awareness. Usually they are running away from that. And the point is, they will want to be to the detriment of others. Now, of course, these two are born out of ignorance to a certain extent. Well, psychopathy is a bit different in a way because, well, it's much trickier to figure out certain things about that. But usually, narcissistic people always want to rule things. And if you take religion, right? Christianity, the way it is highly narcissistic, right? It is paternal specifically because the ones who would rule society, well, have mainly been men, right? And if their ego could not resist the so-called temptation of a woman, they would always call to bad things, right? They would call her as a witch or whatever, to call for the sympathy of people so that, they win those people's attentions, right? And once they win those people attention, right, that person would be executed and the masses would slowly and surely be programmed that that is the only good, right? It's the same thing that happens nowadays, right? When someone wants to tell the truth, so many people jump and, supporting the matrix and the system, which is, sick to the greatest of its roots, they will call those people bad names, right? In many cases, even the United States, before bombing different countries, they would call them in so many different ways to win, public opinion, right? Just like Operation Iraqi Freedom, it needed a lot of opinion from the ignorant masses, right? And the people mostly did nothing, so that's why they could easily carry their plans. Because one thing that we're not telling people is that, if you keep your voice silent, that is green light, right? That is consent to others to carry on their agendas. And that is exactly what Christianity has been doing to people. Their voices never matter because ultimately everything that you do in life, you are just being surveilled by this God that has nothing else to do, right? This white-bearded fuck that has nothing else to do than sit there, watch Earth TV, each and every one of your moves, right? And, well, guess what? This is basically what this present world has become. Many people would ask how. Well, we don't have surveillance networks, right? Some people may say that, through occult knowledge, people could know what things would happen in the future. After all, let's not forget that in the pyramids, right? In many pyramids, not necessarily those in Egypt, because there are pyramids in so many places of the world, right? In pyramids, there are symbols, right, that depict present-day technology. There are hieroglyphs depicting helicopters and jet aircrafts. And there's also in Spain, there is I think, 15th or 16th century monastery, or I think it's even older, that has also some poles, okay, some poles made of stone, and they have different symbols engraved on them. And one of them is a picture of a cosmonaut, okay, a person who moves into space. These people may sound very funny to the ignorant, but if people would agree that so many of these things can easily be found on the internet and they're not just random mumbo jumbo, the point is, all these things that we see nowadays have been engraved in such monuments because they have existed in the previous times, right? If you look carefully, there are so many proofs of that which were, subtlety sent into the future, right, as messages for, the next generations. There are many tablets, right, stone tablets scattered around Egypt that have been, studied, and it took people a long time to realize that those actually had hidden meanings, right? And, when people would see, for example, the goddess Isis, right, or I think that's the name, she's depicted as having wings, but the point is, she is in many situations depicted as actually sitting, but her wings are spread. This is not necessarily the embodiment of a deity that can fly. It is the embodiment of a human that is actually sitting, but at the same time is flying. And one of the tablets actually showed her, right, in between two flowers, and she has her wings spread. Now, funny thing is, that those flowers weren't actually flowers, but were basically, aircraft propellers seen from the front. It may take a very long while to, realize the hidden meanings, because the people who sent those messages, right, they knew that many would actually want to disallow that, because those people lived in times where, just like in our times, there was censorship. So the messages that they would send had to be carefully camouflaged, right? So the point is, once Christianity has settled in Europe, and I think I made a previous video on why Europe is the sickest continent in a way, because this is where Christianity occurred. The most toxic, I can actually call it a political regime, was created here. It created so much suffering for the people and, so much repression. And having repressed the feminine as well, it meant that creativity was also abolished, right? And it created this box, right? This inside box mindset, right? Of opposing change. And you can look at Christianity, how it's been. Europe has been kind of the same throughout the time. When people like Copernicus, stated that the universe is not, revolving around the Earth, but the Earth is revolving around the Sun, and, other people came up with points like this, they were executed, right? Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, a lot of wisdom and knowledge was still flourishing, right? Especially, let's say, in Eastern Asia, right? Southeastern Asia, right? Japan, China, Korea, right? India, countries that have always been known for their own wisdom, right? You also have Egypt, right? In the ancient times, an Egyptian mathematician, right? They proved that the world is round by just using the height of a pyramid and the angle that, or something like that, the angle that the sun, would make, right, with the earth, namely the shadow of the pyramid or something like that. They made some mathematical calculations and they estimated the size of the planet is around 12,000 kilometers or something like that, which is quite very accurate if one says. Okay, now if you ask several, astronomy books, you will see most likely there's a different perspective of that, right? There's a different opinion. Many will say it's this, it's that, but usually the values are somewhat similar. So for someone using, well, basically no technology, right? You just use a pyramid, which was already built, and, the shadow made by the sun to simply realize that, the planet is actually round, not flat. Well, if that would happen in Europe, that person would definitely be executed. So with such a regime of control, right, people couldn't do anything else than, ultimately end up as conquerors. Because when you only have masculine energy and the feminine is utterly, put down, the point is the only fate for such people is to become conquerors. And, well, many of the European countries, Western powers, they have become conquerors. But the problem is, as they spread, they also spread this disease, this plague called Christianity. And also, many of the people settled in different parts of the world, and as they made, as they settled, they had children with the inhabitants, which meant that they also spread the karma of Christianity, right? The hundreds of years of repression, right, and suppression, which kind of has led easily to what the world nowadays is, right? A world that lives under this influence that karma is bad and, you will be suffering eternally for sins that you have committed. But ultimately, the entire life would just be sin, because when you do something and you don't know it's to the detriment of others, well, you don't need to be ashamed. But so many people are still, fleeing or trying to flee this, hideous, torturous idea of judgment, that they will be judged. After all, statistics made in the world showed that the greatest fear in the world is that of God, because ultimately people have been feeling for hundreds of years. People have been feeling useless in the face of this moronic invention, okay? As Einstein said, God is nothing else than the embodiment of all human incapabilities, right? Everything that human couldn't create, it was always used, God was always used and as an excuse, right? Because it's always God's will, God wanted it this way, right? So God is used in so many ways by people to justify their own failures or to justify their unwillingness to do certain things. Now, God may exist or may not exist, but it most likely doesn't look the way we have invented it, because we have invented him. People have to agree that. People have not to agree. People have to realize that, God was created with a certain image so that people can easily accept them, right? Because gods may be several beings, not necessarily a single being. And it's obvious that they would be a man because, the fuckers who ruled the world, most likely the same who do nowadays, wouldn't accept the idea of, a female god, right? A goddess. Because, well, ultimately, they always wanted just control because they were just ignorant people. They were just ignorant fucks living in low vibrations. And, of course, narcissistic specifications demand that everyone else must live as miserably as you at least. But they obviously always have to live even more miserable than you imagine you have lived. Because ultimately, in the narcissist's mind, everything that is bad constantly repeats and repeats and repeats. That is why, also psychology says, every time you remember something, it's actually the last time you thought about that, it's not the original idea. So basically, you're always adding an extra layer of emotion, right? And psychological trauma. And, well, with narcissists, they have these repetitive cycles which are so fast and so fast, so fast, and every little suffering to them becomes tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold, and it's obvious that, impulsively speaking, they will want people to suffer even more, because ultimately misery loves company, right? You only can create such a hideous complex out of narcissism because, you know, a creator of this whole cosmos has to be specifically looking like you, right? Which clearly shows a very narrow-minded view, a very childish view, because if you awaken a cow, the first thing that it will realize is that there is definitely something beyond it that has created this world. So most likely it will believe that a greater cow has created this, right? This is almost, this is a level of awareness that belongs somewhere in the early ages of the actor, right? The second stage of awareness, right? The first one being the drone level, where, the individual basically doesn't exist, right? They are always part of a tribe, like humanity has existed, right? For thousands, if not millions of years. And then you have the actor, right? The second level of awareness, where the being becomes more knowledgeable of certain things. They are still slaves to their own mind, but at least they start using their own discernment. And the more in tune they become to their discernment, the more capable they become, right? The more advanced they become, and, they make themselves ready to ascend to the greater levels of awareness, right? The levels 3 and 4. Now, the point is, religion ultimately is nothing else than a slavery to your own self, because basically you are told some ideas from a young age where you're not capable of understanding or accepting your own discernment. And obviously you're surrounded by a lot of crab people who have also suffered a lot, and they carry that, narcissistic spectrum, right? That narcissistic baggage, which demands them impulsively to pull you down as well, because they have suffered, you also must suffer, right? Ultimately, the point is, well, you may not choose your parents, but you definitely have full control over your own life and over what you accept. For a certain period in life, you will have to go on with a slave's life, right? As a child, you always have to do what parents tell you, always. As then you go to school, you're also a slave of teachers, because you always have to behave the way they want, right? So don't tell me that this world doesn't stink of narcissism, okay? Because you're probably a case if you don't accept the truth as is. Not because I'm saying it, but because that's how things go, right? If you become aware of certain things, you obviously become aware of this as well. So the point is, then you get into a job, and guess what? You're going to be again a slave, because you have to behave in a certain way that many people want. And you're also a slave of your own expectations, right? The expectations that have been implanted into your mind, that you have to behave in a certain way based on gender, based on, I don't know, probably in some societies even skin color, right? Or whatever, right? Age and, well, let's say political class, social class, right? So, with all these being said, right, the only way that religion has ruled over people and will ever rule over people is by separation. Because through separation, individuals are easy to rule, right? When people become ignorant, they will automatically separate themselves from everyone else, because, well, that's how they will always live, right? Ignorance can never be united. They may flock together against others to pull them down, but ultimately they are still gonna eat one another, because, well, ignorance is like cannibalism. Everyone sees the others as a tool for their own agendas, because ultimately everyone else is nothing else than a tool. Because when you're ignorant, you only live in survival levels. And hence, when you live in survival levels, you are disconnected from sensitivity, emotion, patience, and, well, discernment, right? So you only live impulsively. When you live impulsively, you will use literally everything at your disposal, that includes everyone as well, to make sure that you survive. That is why you have so many people who may end up as having been rich, they have become billionaires. Of course, many of them have become so on their own potential, right? Through their own skills. But it doesn't mean that if you're a billionaire, you are necessarily a highly awakened person. Because many billionaires still exist in this mindset that, you know, they are living under survival, right? Because the moment you are doing things with your money to the detriment of others, because ultimately when you are rich, right, just like the church, right, the church has always been rich and powerful because every richness that you gain to the detriment of others. This is a highly advanced aspect that requires a lot of sensitivity to realize. Now, I'm not saying it is bad to be rich, but you have to understand that richness always comes to the detriment of others. Especially the more people there are on the planet, the more wealth you acquire, it will always be to the detriment of at least a few or certain individuals. One quote of mine, I don't know where it came from, said that, well, for every being that has a good life, right, 1,000 people, right, 1,000 other people usually suffer, right? And that's how things kind of end up being, right? Because ultimately, that's one of the points. That is a principle of existence. The more one acquires, other people simply suffer. And, well, the well-being of one individual is always going to be detrimental to the well-being of a collective. Because think about Christianity. The whole history, the whole Europe has lived in utter poverty and, shame and guilt and distress, right? No one cared about another. But the church and, the clergy were always rich, right? They always had all the riches and they were hand in hand with, well, not in all cases, but in many cases, they were somewhat hand in hand with, the rulership, right? The monarchies. And, well, that was detrimental to the people because 1% or even less than 1% of the population had a great life, right? But religion said, hey, if you live in poverty, you will have won your, eternal life in wealth, right? So people accepted to live in poverty, believing that that is the only way, that is the righteous way. At the same time, the king was exempt from this because they were all, the population in their ignorance were taught that, the king is a descendant from God, but the king is still a person who once belonged to the population, right? And they were chosen as someone, right? The monarchies, they are not some angels that descended upon the earth. They are still people who once belonged to the population, but they chose themselves, right? Or they were chosen by the population, right, to represent them. But the way things go, usually, the population, I doubt they ever accepted them. They simply proclaimed themselves more or less. Well, we're not here to interpret history because ultimately we don't need to interpret history. We haven't lived it, so why, struggle with it? The point about life is just focus on life as it is right now. Don't focus on things that are beyond one's experience, right? If things are beyond your experience, don't focus on them because ultimately they're just going to contribute to your own suffering. The point is, Christianity, any religion, means a set of ideas. If you don't believe those ideas, well, ultimately you are against that religion. You are against that set of beliefs. And when you are against the set of beliefs, you'll always be marginalized because, well, people identify themselves oftentimes with things, and this always means separation. Identification with something, right? It's always called identification of the self, right? Yourself identifies with something. You are here as a recording camera, right? You're capable of perceiving emotions and thoughts, ideas, right? Points of view through discernment. But those things don't belong to you, right? They are yours, yes, temporarily, but they are not you, right? If they're not you, well, it doesn't matter ultimately, right? So the point is, this being said, all of those are just, toys you are playing with. The problem is many people identify themselves with that, right? It's like you are saying, I am my cup of tea. Well, doesn't that mean that, that makes you a nutcase, right? Of course, present day society is so sick that, and also it's so fake that it scares people, right? The truth will scare people. So that is why people need, in order to rule people, they have to invent a sense of the truth, right? So that is why the Bible says, hey, God is truth and his word is the truth, right? But other monotheist religions may also state that. So the problem is, whose truth is the truth, right? Ultimately, the only truth in this world is union, right? But unfortunately, if you want to use black magics, or, well, technically speaking, manipulation, you have to create dissension amongst people. You have to create separation, because that's the only way you can rule, divide and conquer. Unity is the only truth in this world, because through unity have societies existed. But unfortunately, so fracturing and separation have also, empires also fell, right? And history has a very funny way of repeating itself. Nowadays, people are running away one from the other because they're all afraid of a little virus, right? And, well, society has kind of fallen if people are still not capable of observing it. Things will never ever come back to how they were, because society has already fallen, right? Babylon has fallen, as the movie stated. The point is, society as it has been is no longer supporting humanity, so it can no longer exist. Nowadays, what we are seeing is the last grab for power done by the billionaires, right? But look at them as they are, right? These billionaires that many people still may believe they are conscious, okay? Look at how they see things, right? They see the planet is a waste. They also took part in making sure the planet is a waste. Many of them have, taken part in ensuring that that humanity remains dumb, right? Why do you think so many social medias have been created, right? Just because Mark Zuckerberg speaks in their own, robotic language and, voice pack the fact that, all they want is for people to be united with their loved ones. This society only works on emotions being used against your own self. If you haven't realized this much, well, unfortunately, well, you will have to realize it, and it will most likely be a traumatizing way. But it's always emotion used against you, right? Advertisements always make you believe that if you don't have the product that they're promoting, right? The advertisements always promote a product, a set of products, or a certain service. If you don't have that, then you have a problem, because you're gonna stand out or whatever, right? They're gonna invent some kind of fear or insecurity in your life, which means a certain amount of your emotions is turned against you, right? Which goes back to what I was presenting as, black magic or manipulation, right? Any sort of action that helps you turn another person's or a group of persons' attention against them, right? Ultimately, it is also the definition of cancer, because that's what cancer is, right? When something within you decides to turn against you. And that's what many people nowadays are going through. They're going through mental or emotional cancer, right? They're always fighting themselves, right? They're always fracturing themselves, hence why the whole society is fractured. And while so many people are fractured, these billionaires and, corporations are doing nothing else than keep people in further fragmentation, right? You have, nowadays you have these caste systems, right? Where if you don't have enough subscribers, you are not worthy enough, right? And when you use manipulation and when you want to understand manipulated people, you have to ditch the real reality and understand the reality they are perceiving, which means you have to dive into dimensions of madness, because it doesn't matter how reality truly is, right? For that to see, you have to be a seer. But to dive into levels of madness, right, to convince people that, they have been manipulated, you have to descend into their own madness and see what suffering they are having and, how they perceive the world, right? So you need to be truly a powerful seer, right? You need to have a very strong emotional and psychological foundation, because manipulation will always work, because humans have a very funny way of being much easier to fool than to be convinced that they have been fooled. Because in ignorance, people will always accept the first thing that comes to them, right? That comes served to them, right? Even in society, right? A woman will start crying and points her finger to you that, you touched her breasts, right? Or you did whatever imaginary thing. People will instinctively want to protect her, and you might even end up beaten. You don't know that woman, you don't know what happened, but that can be handled, right? A man comes crying, and if they cry good enough, the other ones who also love misery, they will accept that person's attention and they will play their game, because that's, narcissistic cooperation, as I call it. And, they expect something in return, but they will play that person's game, right? Some of them will even come as fake witnesses and say, hey, I've actually seen that person beating this poor man, right? And these cases are really, they are really real, okay? Many may have already happened, because people want attention, right? If you live in a continent for 1,000 years where no one represents you, right? Even as a child, right? Everyone is stuck in their own mind, and everyone is disconnected from their emotions. Everyone wants emotions, everyone wants attention, but no one cares for themselves, no one cares for anyone, right? You're stuck in such a world. That is a great problem, because this gives birth to people who are disconnected from themselves, and this will only lead to people causing traumas to themselves, and especially to their following people. And you can't expect people nowadays to suddenly shake themselves out of that, right? So that is why, well, we still have people living like crab people. Anyone who seems to be going towards a path in which they become better and better, right? They will try to pull them down instantly, right? Because, well, it's the fear that they will lose them. Some people will even use religion against them because, well, you're gonna anger God, it's not good to be like this, and typically they will use emotions against them, right? You wouldn't want to leave me as a child, right? Or to leave me as a parent. You don't want to leave me alone. Who the fuck cares? I'm grateful for you to have given birth to me, but, well, I have a life to live, right? No one owes you anything in this world, and, well, you don't owe anyone anything. Except your mother, they gave you birth, you have to be respectful for that, but ultimately when it comes to your own existence, that is only yours, right? But religion is a tool, a powerful tool that even in my country, it is used by elder people to control you. In one way or another, I'm not trying to demonize them, but ultimately it has only been a tool to control people, right? Anyone who would have a sense of discernment or would think otherwise, right? They would be utterly, blackmailed or even disposed of by society, right? Because, when a certain party wanted to do something, they were threatened, right, by the priesthood that they would be excommunicated, or, all sorts of inventions, right? Because narcissism is always about inventing things that are being used against you, right? And you're also gonna be played upon like a fiddle, right? You're gonna be torn into pieces, and each piece of you has to be turned against the other. So you're basically being turned into a warfare. And that's basically what happens with people, right? If you look at people nowadays, they're just a battlefield of tiny pieces fighting one another because, well, people don't know how to be unified. This is the plague that Christianity has helped tremendously at creating. And, well, the well-being of some people has always been to the, well, detriment of the masses, right? It's always been to the detriment of the masses mentally, because people were taught bad things. People weren't taught the truth about them, who they really are, not just some slaves who have to bow down to a white-bearded fuck. It's always been, detrimental to their emotions, because Christianity has been about repressing. You must not present any thought, any thought about sex is, a sin, but, people were always sinful, and the priesthood were no exception, because you cannot live without sexuality, right? And then people became more and more trapped into the mind, and it never mattered how reality really was, right? It all mattered how people perceived it. And that's ultimately one of the small termed successes, right? That, how can I call it? Oh yes, manipulation has, because just like any lie, manipulation have an expiry date, right? humanity will reach a moment when they will say, you know what, religion is simply irrelevant. We do not require it any longer. Of course, it is not important to ditch it entirely. People need to believe in something beyond them. But I tell you that religion will be banned. It has been declared by many countries as a case of psychiatry. And this is actually somewhat going in a good direction. But the point is, people don't need to ditch religion. People need to ditch religion as a tool for manipulation. That has been that which ruined Europe for hundreds of years. And then ultimately it led to the ruination of the whole world by spreading that karma of repression throughout the world. And nowadays, humanity has reached a level where the greatest fear is that of God. The greatest fear that humans have is that of a God that we have invented, right? Because you have to be a big moron, right? You have to be a big narcissist to accept that some deity somewhere up there in the sky actually cares about you, right? Actually knows about you. Do you think that someone or something that created the whole cosmos, right, with its billions of galaxies, that of course the ignorance who created religion didn't know, but do you think that such a deity actually knows about you? Because if this God is so perfect, why do they need to think about you, right? Ask yourself this question. Do you think they actually know you? Do you think they actually care for you? Because the point is, they don't exist to care for you, and you don't exist to care for them. It is your point if you choose to believe in that or those which created the universe, right? Everyone needs to believe in something which is greater than them, because ultimately we all need to tend towards something that is better than us, right? But do you truly think that creation is aware of your existence? Because you in your own Bible you say that God is perfect, right? But if God is perfect and you are imperfect, how come you end up believing that God actually needs you, right? Or that you need God, right? You're gonna be here on this planet, be it that God knows or not. You're gonna spend your life, even if God knows or not of you, and you're gonna die, even if God knows or not about you. That is the whole point. You have to live life even if the gods that you believe in exist or not, right? Ultimately, your life is not to serve deities, right? It's to take them as an example, yes, but ultimately it is to live that journey, right? From unwakefulness to wakefulness, from unconsciousness to consciousness. And this is what's happening in the whole world. People are waking up. People are realizing that so many of these ideas, they have been fake. They have been following things that have been detrimental to their well-being, right? And as every society falls, because all lies have an expiry date, what we are seeing nowadays is the final push for power, right? The final grab for power. Because, well, when a society falls, right, the rulership wants to take as many souls with them, right? There have been so many documentaries presenting things about the future, right? The Digital Angel, if you still remember it, right? About the mark of the beast, right? Who will have been, implanted in many people's hands, and, only people who have that mark of the beast will be given privileges in society, right? And then if you look at things, right, and you believe religion and you actually, distance yourself from that, but to a certain extent, right, and you look at things the way they are, ask yourself one question. Is religion actually supporting a God that is actually good, or, well, is it actually supporting something bad, right? Is religion actually supporting you as an individual, or is it something just like a tool to support, other people's agendas, right? And usually when some folks' agendas are being supported, that's kind of always to the detriment of others. Now I can keep up with the video, and, well, I think it's kind of enough. Hopefully this has been introspective and eye-opening enough. You are appreciated. Take care of yourselves. I'm sending you lots of love. And, well, all the good in the world. Ferenc Board signing out.